Why shouldn't they have jobs? Are they holding down their jobs? Are they doing their job well?
If they intimidate me,
Obviously, they're holding down their jobs, or they'd be fired, wouldn't they?
Are these guys working for Ma Bell?
No, none of them are working for Ma Bell. Ma Bell has a policy against homosexuals. All homosexuals.
Today we can easily see rainbow flags flying across America, from the White House to city squares, from the Oscar stage to small classrooms. People can openly hold hands, kiss in broad daylight, and receive blessings from the community. But if we turn back to 1940 to 1980, on this very same land, just one lingering glance or a passing rumor could cost someone their job, their reputation, even their family. It was a time when the LGBT+ community had to live in the shadows, love in fear, and survive through silent signals no one dared to name. That stark contrast is a long journey filled with tears. And in this video, we will return to the past to look at 15 differences between the gay community in America, then and now, differences that still stir the hearts of an entire generation when remembered. 15. Lavender Scare. The fear called the hunt for gay people. Can you imagine that just one small rumor could wipe out an entire career you had built for a lifetime overnight? That was exactly what happened to thousands of gay people in America during 1940 to 1960 in a period called the Lavender Scare, the fear of lavender. America at that time was living under the tension of the Cold War. In the 1950s, Senator Joseph McCarthy launched his anti-communist crusade, and at the same time, the government believed that gay people were also a security threat. The reasoning was simple. People who lived in secrecy could be blackmailed, easily manipulated into spying. And so, instead of being protected, the LGBT community became a target to be eliminated. In 1953, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed Executive Order 10,450, which allowed the dismissal of any federal employee deemed morally corrupt. That vague phrase became the perfect excuse for mass purges. In the State Department alone, by 1950, at least 91 employees had been forced out because they were suspected of being gay. Some FBI records even wrote down specifics. One man lost his job simply for visiting a Washington, D.C. bar, labeled a deviant hangout. A young Pentagon worker was fired after neighbors reported that he often took evening walks with another man. Picture that scene. Washington, D.C. in the 1950s. The American flag waving proudly above government buildings, while inside, the carpeted hallways echoed with trembling footsteps. Every morning, many LGBT civil servants passed through security checkpoints with hearts racing, afraid that today might be the day their name was read out. At lunch in the cafeteria, suspicious glances and hesitant conversations created an atmosphere of constant fear. At night, they left the offices in silence, stepping down cold marble stairs, knowing that just one vague report could erase both their career and their dignity. And the most painful part, most of them had to leave quietly, without a word of defense. No protests, no resistance, only shadows disappearing from the workplace, leaving behind a lifetime of dedication. Looking back, it is almost impossible to believe that such an America ever existed. Because now, in the very place where Executive Order 10,450 was once signed, the White House proudly raises the rainbow flag during Pride Month. The very agencies that once fired LGBT employees now honor them in Pride ceremonies. Yet for those who lived through the Lavender Scare, the memories remain. Memories of an America where a single passing rumor was enough to erase an entire life. Or 14. Parks ambushed by police. From the late 1940s through the 1960s, for many gay people, parks and public restrooms were some of the only free spaces they had. Central Park and Bryant Park in New York, Lafayette Park right across from the White House in Washington, D.C., or the restrooms at Grand Central Station. All were once secret meeting spots for members of the LGBT community. They couldn't bring each other home. They couldn't hold hands openly on the streets. So the shadows of the parks became makeshift shelters. But that very secrecy made them easy prey. Police often used a tactic called entrapment. An officer in plain clothes would strike up a casual conversation, maybe touch someone lightly, or give a subtle glance. If the other person responded, the handcuffs came out instantly. Arrested not just for indecent conduct, they would be named in the papers, lose their jobs, even see their families fall apart. Some recalled that a single handshake at the wrong time, in the wrong place, could bury a life forever. The atmosphere was so suffocating that decades later, when the film Cruising, 1980, was released, depicting police infiltration into New York's gay community, audiences fiercely debated it. But those who had lived through that era simply nodded quietly. Yes, we really did live in that kind of fear. Today, if you walk through Central Park, you will see LGBT couples openly holding hands, taking photos, even proposing on the lawns. Lafayette Park is still filled with flags, but now the rainbow flag flies alongside the national flag. That feeling of walking in fear has become history. Yet, if you listen closely to the memories of older generations, you can still hear the echoes of police whistles, pounding footsteps, and hearts racing in the stillness of a park that seemed peaceful. A wound has healed, but it will never be erased from history. 13. The awkward 3-article rule. Have you ever thought that a dress, a pair of high heels, or a tube of lipstick could become criminal evidence? But in America during the 1940s to 1960s, that was the reality. Police at the time enforced what was called the 3-article rule. Anyone wearing more than 3 pieces of clothing that didn't match their biological sex could be considered breaking the law and arrested on the spot. This vague rule turned drag queens, transgender people, or even gay men and women who simply dressed differently into criminals because of clothing in bars around Greenwich Village or San Francisco's Tenderloin. Police often raided, lining people up and checking their outfits. A pair of lace stockings, a bit of blush, enough to write into the arrest record. Newspapers called it a cross-dressing arrest, and when photos were printed in the press, their lives became a public hell. Yet from that very repression, drag and queer culture found a fierce underground strength. Drag queens like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera turned the forbidden dress into a weapon of resistance, standing at the front lines of the Stonewall Uprising in 1969, shouting for their right to exist. A dress once used as criminal evidence is now a banner of pride in the community's legacy. These days, RuPaul is a global star. RuPaul's Drag Race airs on national television, and drag brunch has become a weekend staple in major cities. But the paradox still lingers. In some conservative states, laws banning drag shows in public spaces are being introduced. History feels like a loop, reminding us that what we take for granted now was once something earlier generations had to win through humiliation and blood. And from that, we come to realize a dress is never just fabric. It can be a crime, but it can also be a flag. 12. Secret LGBT plus bars and the fear of police raids. In history, hidden deep in glamorous New York, There were people who had to live in the shadows, finding a little freedom in cramped bars. Greenwich Village in the late 1960s was such a place. The Stonewall Inn wasn't just an old bar with neon light spilling through foggy windows. It was a refuge for gay people, drag queens, transgender folks, those who had no place in the world outside. In the mix of disco beats, rock tunes, spinning dances, and bursts of laughter, they found a small piece of freedom, even if only for a few nighttime hours. But that freedom was terrifyingly fragile. Everyone knew that at any moment police could burst in and shatter it all. And on one June night in 1969, it happened. The doors slammed open, boots pounded against the wooden floor, flashlights lit up faces. "Hands up! All of you come with us." Scenes like that were familiar. People dragged out, newspapers printing their pictures the next day, names disgraced across town. But that night, no one backed down. When a woman was shoved roughly by an officer, the crowd outside erupted. Shouts mixed with breaking glass, bricks flew through the air. For the first time, people who had been pushed to the margins stood their ground. The narrow streets of the village became a battleground, and the fire lasted for days. The Stonewall night transformed fear into strength. It was not just a brawl, it was the birth of the gay liberation movement. After those years of struggle, you can now walk into a gay bar in New York, San Francisco, or Los Angeles and see rainbow flags flying proudly at the door. Drag queens performing for hundreds, cheering fans, and pride parades filling the streets like national festivals. The Stonewall Inn, once branded a den of vice, is now a national monument recognized by President Obama in 2016. But for the generation that lived through 1969, the memory of that moment is still vivid. From eyes cast downward in fear, to the instant they lifted their heads and defied the police. One night was enough to change history, and enough to prove that freedom is never a gift handed out, but something to be won with the whole heart. 11. Secret codes instead of dating apps. Imagine living in a world where you couldn't say who you were, couldn't openly love who you loved, but your heart still longed to be seen and understood. So how did gay people in America between 1940 to 1980 find one another? The answer was in fragile signals, in silent codes hidden in glances and gestures. In Greenwich Village, New York during the 1960s, or along Castro Street in San Francisco in the 1970s, queer life flowed through signals only insiders could read. A half-second longer glance in a village cafe could be an invitation. A light touch on the wrist while passing by, seemingly accidental, was a sign. Even something as small as a blue or red handkerchief tucked into a back pocket, part of the hanky code, could announce what you were looking for. But that secret world was full of risk. One wrong look could put you face to face with an undercover cop in Bryant Park, or a restroom at Grand Central. A smile that lingered too long in a bar could turn into an arrest report, your name printed in the local paper the very next morning. Losing your job, your friends, even your family, that was the price of a single gesture. And yet, in the midst of fear, the community still found ways to recognize one another. In semi-legal bars of the village, a long, slow dance, a discreet handshake, or even a song chosen on the jukebox could be code. In Castro, hastily written notes slipped into a pocket, or quiet meetings on the steps of the Castro Theater gave people hope that they were not alone. Dates began with a quick glance on a street corner. Friendships were built on tiny signals, and all of it wove together an underground network, unwritten, unofficial, but strong enough to sustain the community through its harshest years. Today, that connection happens with just a tap on a phone. Grindr, Her, Tinder, public dating apps have replaced stolen glances in dim bars. In just 10 years, LGBT app users multiplied fivefold, turning hidden signals into tools of open, fearless love. The contrast is overwhelming, from coded looks in the dark to a swipe on a glowing screen. But it is the memory of speaking in silence that makes this generation truly value the freedom to hold hands, smile, and love openly in the daylight of America. 10. Same-sex love as a criminal act. More than 60 years ago, a single kiss could take you from a cafe straight into a jail cell. For decades, from 1940 up until the late 20th century, sodomy laws, statutes criminalizing same-sex intimacy, existed in state codes and were enforced with an iron fist. Picture this: Miami, 1952. A gay couple caught in a car, instantly arrested, their names printed in the local paper. One headline reading, "Arrested for perversion," was enough to end a career, a family, a reputation. The FBI kept files. Police ran entrapment operations, sending undercover officers to flirt and then arresting people on the spot. A wrong touch, a casual remark in a restroom, it was evidence enough. Some lost jobs because a love letter fell into the wrong hands. Newspapers published names and workplaces, making public shaming part of the sentence. To love the same sex meant to love like a thief, in fear, in silence, without holding hands. For those living now, it feels unreal. In 2003, Lawrence v. Texas struck down sodomy laws nationwide. In 2015, same-sex marriage became legal, a victory beyond imagination for people of the 1950s. Though 13 states still keep outdated language in their codes, those laws are unenforceable. From a time when a kiss could destroy your life to a present where that same kiss can take place on the steps of City Hall and be celebrated by the community. 9. When movies said gays must die at the end. Do you remember old black and white films? From the 1940s to the late 1960s, Hollywood was bound by the Motion Picture Production Code, or Hays Code. It mandated that any gay character could not have a happy ending. They could be hinted at, a strange voice, an odd glance, but in the end, they had to meet tragedy. Suicide, murder, or lifelong loneliness. Try to remember the film Tea and Sympathy, 1956. Just a boy, considered different, not like the other young men, was isolated. And the final message to the audience was this: pity him, but never imitate him. Then came The Children's Hour, 1961, with Audrey Hepburn and Shirley MacLaine, where a female character confessed her love for another woman, and immediately afterward took her own life. Scenes like these did not only reflect the rules of the time, they also imprinted deeply on the memory of an entire queer generation, that their existence could only be accepted if it ended in pain. Looking back now, those images feel almost unimaginable. From Brokeback Mountain, 2005, to Moonlight, 2016, and later the series Pose, 2018 to 2021, queer stories stepped directly into the spotlight, winning Oscars, Emmys, and moving audiences worldwide. Yet whenever we revisit those older films, the oppression of that era is still starkly visible. It is a bitter memory. There was once a time when Hollywood told queer people outright that you do not deserve a happy ending. 8. Families who shut the door, and the birth of chosen family. Few things cut deeper than your parents slamming the door because you spoke your truth. From the 1940s through the 1980s, that was the reality for thousands of queer youth across America. Outed or discovered, many were thrown out, disowned, erased from family trees. In the 1970s, New York, teens slept in subway stations and on park benches after being kicked out. But from that darkness came a miracle: the chosen family. Friends and fellow outcasts became brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers. Drag mothers in Harlem's ballroom scene didn't just teach performance. They sheltered and raised a generation abandoned by blood. After nearly 50 years, many American parents can now open their arms to embrace their LGBTQ children, even proudly sharing their wedding photos on Facebook. Same-sex marriage has been legalized, and queer kids are growing up in warmer, more supportive homes. Yet the legacy of the chosen family still lingers, echoing like a reminder. It tells us that there was once a time when, just to survive, queer people had to build their own families, and sometimes those bonds of love they chose proved stronger and more enduring than blood itself. 7. Churches and anti-gay sermons. Picture a Sunday morning in the 1950s. Sunlight streaming through stained glass. Choirs singing hymns. Then from the pulpit, the pastor declares, "Homosexuality is a sin that must be cured." Hundreds sit frozen, and among them, a few squeeze each other's hands in fear, knowing the sermon is aimed at them. From the 1950s through the 1970s, most churches in America treated homosexuality as sickness. Many youths were dragged to healing prayers or harsh therapies. Queer people left services carrying heavy hearts, believing in God but marked as cursed by His house. Now the contrast is stunning. Many churches hang rainbow flags at their doors. Pastors officiate same-sex weddings. Choirs sing "Love is Love" at pride services. Yet the memory remains. There was once a generation who sat on wooden pews, hearing they were wrong. Today's acceptance isn't just social progress. It's collective healing of a wound decades deep. 6. The secret flyers of the Mattachine Society. What we mention next are thin sheets of paper that once cost thousands of people their jobs, got them tailed by the FBI, even dragged into court. On winter nights in early 1950s Los Angeles, a handful of men gathered in a cramped apartment. Around an old table, they wrote, mimeographed, and passed around leaflets. Those fragile sheets were more than ink and words. They were the whispered cries of a marginalized community. Phrases like "we are not alone" and "we must unite for recognition" were hurriedly printed, folded, and slipped into coat pockets. They knew if police found them, it could end in FBI files, court trials, or ruined careers. Founded in 1950 by Harry Hay, the Mattachine Society was one of America's first gay rights organizations. With no social media, no supportive press, their movement lived on secret flyers, quiet meetings and whispered conversations in cafes. But from those scraps of paper, a movement was born. Receiving a leaflet was like being handed a candle in the dark. People hid them in books, under pillows, or locked drawers. One man recalled, "I cried when I read my first flyer. I wasn't alone." That feeling is nearly unimaginable for a generation raised on vibrant pride parades and global LGBTQ plus nonprofits. Today, America has hundreds of organizations from local to national: HRC, GLAAD, GLSEN. Campaigns run on billion-dollar budgets, with billboards and hashtags worldwide. From whispers in rented rooms to shouts in public squares, the journey took less than a century. 5. Schools where gay couldn't be mentioned. No books, no lessons, not a single word. That was the school memory of millions of queer American teens between 1940 to 1980. They learned about Washington and Lincoln, but never that gay people existed, let alone contributed to history. This silence wasn't neglect. It was policy. In many states, mentioning homosexuality in class was considered promoting deviant lifestyles. A teacher suspected of being gay risked instant firing and public shame. Queer kids grew up in crushing loneliness, with no words for who they were, no role models, no reassurance that they weren't wrong. One student from the 1960s recalled, "I spent hours in the library searching for any book that mentioned people like me. All I found were lines calling it a disease." For queer teens, school became years of fear and self-hatred. Now, many schools have GSAs, gay-straight alliances. States like California, New Jersey, and Illinois include LGBTQ plus history in textbooks. Teachers put rainbow flags on desks to signal safety. Instead of silence, many students grow up knowing they are seen, valued, and supported. Yes, some states try to revive "Don't Say Gay" laws, banning LGBT topics in schools. But the truth is undeniable. From absolute silence, American schools have shifted into places where many young people can finally learn to love themselves. Looking back, the generation that grew up in the shadows understands most deeply. A single word, a single page in a book, a small flag alone, each could change the entire course of a child's life. 4. The AIDS crisis. Memories of funeral after funeral in the early 1980s in San Francisco, New York, and Los Angeles. People began whispering about a strange new disease. At first it was called the gay disease, a term that carried both stigma and fear. And nobody knew the cause, only that friends, lovers, and familiar faces from bars and stages suddenly grew frail and disappeared. Week after week, another name was added to the funeral list. In San Francisco's Castro district, once vibrant streets fell silent. Black cloths hung from apartment windows. In New York, small churches held funerals almost daily. Young people, sometimes not even past their 20s, were laid to rest alone, their families refusing to come see them one last time. For the LGBT community, the greatest pain wasn't just death. It was the brutal indifference of society and government. President Reagan didn't publicly mention AIDS until 1985, by which time tens of thousands had already died. A man from Greenwich Village remembered, "Going to funerals in your early 20s was normal. Some weeks I went to 3 or 4. We wore black so often it felt like a uniform of grief." For later generations, such stories sound like an unimaginable nightmare. Today, antiretroviral therapy, ART, allows HIV-positive people to live healthy lives for decades. PrEP prevents thousands from contracting the virus. Campaigns like You Equals You, Undetectable Equals Untransmittable, and national prevention networks have transformed HIV from a death sentence into a chronic, manageable condition. And every June, during Pride, memorials appear again, reminding us that today's community is living the life so many before never had the chance to. The difference is staggering. From a time when AIDS meant death and rejection, to a present where medicine and compassion bring hope. Yet the memory of endless funerals remains a scar in the heart of the LGBT community, a scar the world must never forget. 3. The cures for homosexuality. There was a time when, if a child was suspected of being gay, parents would take them to a psychiatrist, not to understand them, but to cure them. From the 1940s through the 1970s, hospitals and clinics across America classified homosexuality as a mental disorder. The American Psychiatric Association didn't remove it until 1973. But before that, countless young people endured horrific so-called therapies. Some were forced to sit for hours, staring at images of men, while being shocked with electricity to instill disgust. Others were injected with hormones or sedated with heavy drugs. Some teens were committed to psychiatric hospitals for months simply because their parents wanted them fixed. In extreme cases, lobotomies, brain surgery, were performed as if sexuality were a tumor to cut away. In big cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, these clinics were hailed as scientific progress. In reality, they were torture chambers dressed in white coats. One survivor recalled, "I remember the smell of disinfectant, the sound of the shock machine, and crying until I couldn't breathe, while no one stopped." Today, conversion therapy is banned in dozens of states and widely condemned by medical professionals. Survivors speak out, reminding the world that no one ever needs to be cured for who they love. Modern therapy now focuses on acceptance, confidence, and ensuring LGBT youth never feel alone. The contrast is a chasm, from dark rooms filled with sobs drowned out by machines, to community workshops where people hold hands and shout, "Love is love." The memory of those treatments is darkness, but it makes the light of today's freedom shine even brighter. 2. Neighborhoods of refuge, Castro and Greenwich Village. There were years when stepping just a few blocks outside meant stares, beatings, arrests, and headlines. But in the heart of San Francisco and New York, small oases gave gay people a fragile breath of peace. By the late 1960s, San Francisco's Castro district had become the heart of the West Coast queer community. By day, it looked like any other neighborhood. But by night, neon signs from bars, cafes, and theaters glowed over shy smiles that slowly grew bolder. On brick steps, young men sat close, brushing hands in secret joy. Across the country, Greenwich Village's Christopher Street pulsed with jazz smoke, cigarette haze, and fleeting romances sparked in a glance. But that safety was fragile. Police raids were constant threats. Informants lurked. Yet for queer people between 1940 to 1980, these streets were heaven. Only there could they see themselves reflected in another's eyes. Castro, the village. These names became symbols of survival, affirmations that we are still here, no matter who tries to erase us. It's almost unthinkable now that those same neighborhoods, once hiding in shadows, blaze with rainbow flags. Castro is a proud tourist destination, with visitors taking photos beneath its giant flag. Greenwich Village is living history, alive each June with pride celebrations. The contrast couldn't be clearer, from weary hideouts of fear to public squares of freedom and pride. And when you walk those streets today, you can almost hear faint echoes, the music, the nervous laughter, the trembling steps of half a century ago. Those footsteps laid the path so others can now walk tall, hand in hand, in daylight. 1. When gay people were shamed on the front page. Can you believe that a handshake in the wrong place or a conversation in a park could land your name on the front page? In the 1950s to 60s, papers like the Washington Post, Miami Herald, and Los Angeles Times published names, addresses, and occupations of people arrested under moral charges. Words like pervert, degenerate, and sex deviant screamed from headlines. In Miami in 1954, the Herald called a mass arrest the Pervert Elimination Drive. In Boise, Idaho in 1955, papers called it a homosexual explosion, leading to over 1,500 men investigated, many losing jobs and families. A Florida teacher in 1961 saw his name printed one day. He was fired the next, never to teach again. A government worker in D.C. was caught in a public restroom. By morning, his name was bold in the paper. The press didn't just report. It wielded power against people already forced into the shadows. But today, those same outlets are platforms of recognition. The New York Times runs heartfelt obituaries for artists lost to AIDS. Time put Elliot Page on its 2021 cover with the words, "I'm fully who I am." The shift is more than a media milestone. It's proof of how far America has traveled, from humiliation to honor, from erasing names to celebrating them worldwide. Looking back from 1940 to 1980 to today, it's almost impossible to believe how deeply America has changed. From living in shadows, heads bowed in fear, the LGBT+ community can now proudly raise the rainbow flag across public squares. So what about you? Among these 15 differences, which one strikes you the most? If you want to keep exploring America's hidden memories, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell. We'll take you back into the past with more shocking, moving, and unforgettable stories.